Good morning, folks. How are we doing? Good? Yep. Enjoying Ignite? Which sessions do you like more? Are you guys from Windows 10 world, Office world? Office? Excellent. Yep. So today we're going to talk about building Windows 10 apps for Office 365. So basically, how do we take Office 365 and interact with it in a Windows 10 app, which is pretty new, and we announced a lot of stuff last week in the build. So today in our session, we're going to go see what Windows 10 apps are and kind of build a few examples, and then jump on to Office 365 APIs, how they allow us to build apps, Windows 10 apps, and then talk a little bit about the new unified API that we announced at build, which is in preview. And we're going to see a lot of demos to kind of build the app that I'm going to show you guys. So let's start with Windows 10. So Windows 10 for us is a great step ahead with one operating system now running across all of the Windows devices, whether it's a small tablet with a 5-inch or a phone or two HoloLens, right? So there is the core operating system that is running across, and that helps us for developers to build applications that run across all these different devices. Yes, we had 8.1 where we had Windows Store, and then we had kind of Windows Phone, and there were a lot of Windows Phone Silverlight, Windows Store Silverlight, so there's a lot of confusions in how you decide which ones to build. But with Windows 10, you get one developer platform to build with it. So how does this work? Well, we have something called Universal Windows Platform, which is going to be the central location, central core OS, and which provides APIs for that is common across all the different devices, whether it's a small IoT device or a big tablet to a phone. So they're all same. So what happens for developers is they get the opportunity to build an app, which is one single package and sold in the store with one single store. And the app, you can build it such a way that it adapts to these new devices, whether it's phone or a tablet. So for developers, I think the key set of tools that enables us to build these are the new adaptive UX controls that are available. So these are XAML controls, the day-to-day controls that we see, we build and are familiar with, like radio button, slider, some new controls, but they are basically the same controls you have in Windows Phone, desktop, tablet to Xbox. But they are rendered differently and allow you to also control how they render in these different devices. Some of the examples here, you can see Skype, for example, you have the call button and the video window kind of changing according to a phone or a tablet. You can also see this is a new split view control. This is a control that we will see how to build today and kind of take this control as an example. So it's kind of like having the iOS and Android style navigation where you have the hamburger menu button. You could pretty much put any button there. It's just as an example here, there is a hamburger button, the 3 lines. And if you have a larger view, you actually get to see those by default since you have more space. If it is kind of a phone, you click on it and you get the view. It's very similar to how you have been using the apps in iOS and Android world. And similarly, you can see there is a pivot, and here you just have normal columns. And the command bar that helps you to lay down the view according to whether it's a phone or a device. If it's a phone, let me help the user to reach it very effectively by placing it down. If it's more space, I can put it in a much better place. So you can also use mouse and keyboard, for example. And I really like the default apps that are shipped with Windows 10 to really look at how the adaptive interface works. So here is Calendar, and it clearly shows how you can change the view based on a tablet or a phone view. So a lot of examples. How do we get the tools to build Windows 10 apps and use these adaptive controls? We announced Visual Studio 2015 RC last week at Build. So that comes out of the box with the Windows 10 Universal App Development Tools. On your installer, you just need to go and select the option to say, I need to install the Universal Windows App Tools. And they'll install all the emulators, the simulators, and all the libraries for you to build Windows 10 apps. So let's look at the demo of what a simple Windows 10 apps looks like. So here's Visual Studio 2015 RC. As usual, you click New Project, and you're going to see a new node, Windows Universal. The Windows 8 is the old stuff, the 8.1. The Windows Desktop has all the WPF and the other console apps and libraries. In Windows Universal right now you have a blank app, Clash library, and other stuff here. Like very simple stuff. So if you click blank app, it's going to create a simple project that is very familiar to us. How many of you have built 8.1 apps, Windows Store apps? Excellent. Very few, but it's pretty much exactly the same. For a developer, you don't see a lot of difference here, but the key thing is you don't have a project anymore for Windows desktops or Windows tablet mode or a Windows phone. Everything is into one package, this project, in a moment that we will see once this is created in Visual Studio. So you can see here we have in Windows Universal App. It's just a basic thing. We all app.xaml, main page.xaml. Click app.xaml. You can literally do everything you have been doing in 8.1 store apps, right? And the main page is pretty much, if you know XAML, it carries over to building Windows 10 apps too. In the toolbox, you can see that there are some controls, and all the controls now kind of have the adaptive interface. So when you drag and drop here, it kind of has the same effect and adapts itself to a phone or a tablet or a desktop. So this is a basic app, nothing much going on here. And one of the things here, you see that there is no any CPU, so you just can't run the app. You have to test in x86 and x64. So Windows Phone, today you have x86 Windows phones. For tablet or desktop, you could choose between x86, x64, x64. But when you publish the app, you can say, I need to have the package that has all the components. So if you publish to the store and have a Windows Phone, you'll actually get the app in the marketplace so users can download and install them. Nothing fancy here. You debug this, you're going to get a plain white background app. But we will in a moment see that Windows Phone, how to kind of change the Windows Phone target. So there you go. It's just plain app, right? So one of the key, another difference you see here is actually windowed, right? Unlike in 8.1, which is like a full screen, and you have to minimize. So now you get the opportunity to kind of have any size you want, just like any desktop app you would build. So that's one of the key. I think that I like this very much. I can get back the windowed mode and minimize and do maximize, do whatever I want to do. And if you want to change and see how this looks in Windows Phone, so you get a lot of emulators here for Windows Phone 10. So I already have an emulator running. So if you click, that's going to just deploy the package in Windows Phone. So you no longer need a project. You no longer need anything other than just going up to the target selection and selecting the emulator. So let's go and look at some controls. So what we're going to try to build here is just a user directory. Initially, I'm going to put some static data and build the UX. And then we're going to do the same by interacting with Azure AD, which is in Office 365, and pull your organization users. So initially, it's just a dummy data. And then when we go look at Office API, we'll actually build it from the Office service. So my application here, I have kind of the app.xaml main page, and then I have a people page. So what I'm going to build here is a split view. So split view is something, as the name suggests, it's going to have two views, left and right, and we're going to do something on the left, we're going to do something on the right. So here's my main page. So in my main page, I have a grid. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a top grid so I can actually have some title and some really good-looking colors, and my hamburger button. So here's my hamburger button, and here's my title, and it's a grid. Are you guys able to see the code? Let's minimize this better. So what's the grid doing? The grid is a stack panel. I have a button. Today, in this recent build, the ability to add a hamburger button is just a Unicode value that you just put here in the button content text block. Once you do that, you actually get 3 lines. You are free to use anything you want to use there. You can even put a button if you have like a settings button or whatever. But I'm just using a very simple hamburger menu item here, which is quite common in apps in Android and iOS. And I'm having a back button here right now, which you will see it visible in my Office demo when we actually go and have the navigation stack come up. So when you're in different pages, we get the navigation stack to take us back if you want to go back. And then my title, which is 5-minute meeting. So that's my kind of the top layer. And then I'm going to put my split view. So here's split view. Split view has basic properties, and then it has a pane, and it has a content. That's it. It's very simple. A pane and a content. A pane is left. Content is kind of what comes on the right. I think you can place the you can see the you can place the pane in left or right, but you can't place it top or bottom. So inside my pane, I'm going to put some menu items so people can see, oh, I want to click this and I get a new page. So here's my that's it. You can see how it changed. So I'm putting some menu items here that has some symbols and a text block. So Windows 10 has this really cool symbols that you can use out of the box for some icons. So if you go in the properties, let me show you guys here. So in the symbol, you can choose a lot of properties here. So if you have some default actions that are very familiar with the OS language and you want to have those actions, then you can put these icons as symbols and you can use them in your UX. Even in a button, you can put this in a button and make them transparent so it appears as a thing that you can click. Right? So what I have here is people, calendar, mail, document. The idea is this whole app goes and gets users document, users mail, users calendar. Right now, we're not going to build entirely this whole app, but I'll be building this app in coming weeks and pushing it to GitHub, in Office Dev GitHub, so you can actually download and get the full app with all the things enabled. But right now, we're going to see people for this demo today. So how does this look like? Well, let's try to build and see whether we can actually build this. So that worked. So here's our demo. So that is loading the people page. Let's go and look at the people page. But you can see the split view, the pane, how it is now able to kind of show me the symbols here, right? And if I run this in my local machine, which is a tablet and a desktop, you can see it loads up very beautifully. And I can do the same thing here. It's the same control, nothing different. I didn't write extra code for a desktop or a Windows phone. It's exactly the same. I can maximize. I get everything laid out properly. I can even do this. It's pretty much responsive. So that's the kind of the split view. Now let's go look at how we load the people page. So in the split view content, I have a frame. So the idea here is the frame, you navigate the frame to a particular page depending on the user action. So in my code behind for the main page, what I have here is as soon as my main page is loaded, navigate my frame to the people page, right? So what happens is it's going to go look at the people page.xaml. My people page.xaml is currently a static grid view, and it has a stack panel that has an image and a name. That's it, very simple, right? I'm using an ellipse for the image, so I get a round image rather than just a square. So it's very similar and pretty much the same. Very similar and pretty much the same UX that you would build in Windows 8.1, but it just gives you the ability to put it in a split view that now works across all of the devices, and grid view that kind of gives you the automatically lays out and responsive UX for the items within the grid view. So now it's quite easy to build this, but let's go a little bit deeper to say, hey, I actually, I'm maximizing my app. Why can't you just make this open, right? That's what we saw in our screenshots in the slide. It's like if you're in a desktop, you had the split view actually open. And if you're in a phone or a pretty small width and window, you are able to kind of see it compact. So how can we do that? It's actually quite easy. You could do it in the code. You could do it in the XAML. I quite like the XAML because it makes it easier. So I'm going back to my main page.xaml here. In my grid, I'm going to put some visual state managers. So what are visual state managers? They're going to respond to certain actions in the visual state and help you manage the content, how they are rendered in your grid or in your whatever control you have put in. So the visual state manager has visual state groups. In the visual state groups, I'm creating a white state, medium state, narrow state. The white state is, the trigger is when my window width is 641. So I'm putting my own calculations to say 641 seems like a minimum width that I need for a white state. For a medium state, I need around 321. For narrow state, around 0. So what I'm doing then is I'm setting some targets for my split view. It goes and looks into my split view here with the name. And then I'm changing some properties over there to say display mode, make it inline, and make the pane open, right? When it's 321, make the display compact. Because it's small window, let's make it compact. If it's a bigger window, let's make it open and make the layout as inline, so you actually feel like it is part of the whole UX. And if it's nothing, we say just overlay the display so that there's not much going on there. So what does this happen now? So let's debug. So it's within the, let me do this. So this is the medium state, right? So it's there. As soon as I make it full screen, you can see what happened to my split view. It actually knew that my window is becoming full screen. It's more than 621, and I can actually make use of the space I have here and make the layout compact and make the split view pane open. So that's how you kind of adapt your UX to the different changes. Here I'm taking the change of a very common change that we will have in our app, which is to kind of, hey, I'm maximizing it. How do I help the user to be more productive? And if I minimize, it goes back, right? So that's the Visual State Manager, how it helps in XAML. It's pretty easy, like 10 lines maybe to do this. And this works across Xbox, phone, and everything. So if we see it in the phone, this is my 5-inch device, right? So there's nothing going on here, so you'll always get the default, which is the compact. If you do have a bigger screen, and if your window rules fit with what you have in the Visual State Manager, you'll see that happening here. And in Xbox, when you make it full screen, that will also play along nicely. And the other way to do in the code, really simple thing, you see the grid, the top grid here, it's actually not expanded to the width of my window. Right now it's not, right? So how does this happen? Well, I do a simple little magic. Whenever my window size changes, I'm registering an event. In the event, I'm saying if my size of the window changes, change the top grid menu dot width equal to window dot height, window dot width. So it's very simple, right? As and when my window size changes, the width of the grid also changes. So what happens then is you can see if I don't have this line, I'm commenting it out and do my debug in my local machine. There you go. The top grid doesn't adapt to the size. It doesn't matter how much you do. It just doesn't adapt. So now if I say, hey, I know when my window size changes, change the size of the grid too, the width of the grid. So this, now what it does, it changes according to the width. Easy? So the two ways. You can do it in code, or you can do everything in XAML using state triggers and visual state properties, manager properties. So that's kind of the one of the many things in Windows 10 that you can build, and one of the many controls that you see for adapting the UX in split view. You can capture special triggers for rotating portrait or landscape. So the triggers over here, the state triggers, I believe there are more triggers here for you to capture whether the phone changes to portrait or landscape, and you can act accordingly to the controls. So there are a lot of triggers. I think the documentation is just gearing up more. So if you yep, you'll have a separate. Yep. Yeah, it will act to portrait and landscape. If you want to specifically capture portrait and landscape, you could have some triggers do that too. So any more questions? No. 5. There we go. So that's about Windows 10. Now let's go to Office. So why are we talking about Office today? Well, Office is all about users and their data. Every day people use Office. Every day they put a lot of documents. There's a lot of conversations going on. There are a lot of there are activities in groups, whether it may be the new groups or the old team sites. There's a lot of stuff going on, and people want it to be mobile, right? You want to be able to help people to be productive inside Office, as well as outside. When you have your, bring your own device or your mobile, you want them to be more productive interacting with the data. So the Office Developer Vision helps you to achieve that. On the left, we have about extending Office and helping users be more productive, whether it's building add-ins for Excel or add-ins for SharePoint or add-ins for XYZ in Office. You get the opportunity to extend and help build some add-ins that helps users to be more productive. On the right side, we have the data. There's a lot of data in Office. People do a lot, collaborate a lot. So how do we build applications outside of Office that can take the power of this data and help you build some business processes on top of it, or just interact and provide a new way to have mobile experience for these users? So we do have that, and this session is focused on the right side of how do we get data out of Office. So Office 365 APIs will exactly help you do that. Office 365 APIs are simple REST-based OData APIs that are available in Azure AD framework, which is, again, available in Office 365, that exposes a certain workloads. So we have file, sites, calendar, mail, contacts, groups, conversations, notes. And also we also have videos, the Office 365 videos, the next-gen portals, and Yammer and OneNote in preview. So you get this different workloads available for you in the form of exposed endpoints, and you can talk to them via any application or any device that you have to get the data. Well, how does this look? If you guys want to really go deep into how we expose these, then this is a slide. So we have at the bottom the different workloads, whether it may be even not just Office, but anything that is part of Azure AD. The Azure AD is the key. The Azure is key for us for Office 365. So we have Dynamics CRM. We even have Salesforce.com, right? So everything becomes part of that, the whole different workload area on top of Azure Active Directory. And from there, you can see we can expose a lot of REST endpoints. And then we have SDKs for all different platforms, not just .NET. We also have iOS, Java. We even have Office.js for the Office add-ins. And we also have the Cordova SDK if you are building Apache Cordova applications in Visual Studio, or just using any other Sublime editor, such things. And then our idea is to have some controls. We don't have a lot today, but there are a few. But then you can see us do more on that space. And then you can build any app you want. So you are not constrained in saying, oh, it's Office, I can only build Windows app. No, it's no longer anymore the case. You can build any app, even a PHP app, and talk to these OData REST APIs. So one of the key things everybody feel, especially developers, is authentication, identity management, right? We have how many folks have used Office before with SharePoint, with Outlook and everything? So everything used different identity, objects, different flows. So the idea with Office 365 APIs is all these are put under a single identity management and a single authentication flow, which is possible with Azure AD as the key identity provider in the cloud. So with this, we are able to have a single flow that whether you're using Outlook or SharePoint or whatnot in Office 365, you will have the same flow. And all you need is to tell Azure AD what resources you want access to. These resources meaning the workloads, right? I want to let this application access users' mail, users' documents, or users' calendar, or even Power BI. So that's the idea here. We put resources in the cloud. Your application requests permission to resources, and that follows the industry standard OAuth protocol. It's nothing different to saying building an app in Facebook. Maybe the resources are different in Facebook. Similarly, you just need to know what is the resource, what are the resources, and how do I get access with the OAuth in Azure AD. And there's no longer you need to have username, password. It's all like tokens, so you don't have to store anything anywhere. The only thing that you would have to take care is how do I cache tokens, and with libraries, you can even get that for free. So let's go and a little bit look at the different APIs that we have. So we have the directory, which is Azure AD Graph, which enables you to go query all the users and groups in your organization. So this is kind of the GAL, right, the global access list for your organization. And so you can see the simple example below with how you can go and interact. So this example is kind of showing you the user and groups. There's also the other part of this API, which is a management API. If you want to actually go and manage applications or manage users or licenses, you can even do that with that API. But those mostly fall under admin cases, administrator cases. For us to build real apps, we interact a lot with users and groups. The next is extended profile. So we have this, the profile picture as a very good example, right? We have one in Exchange, we have one in SharePoint, we have one in Active Directory. We are all making it better in the unified API, which you'll see later. But today, if you want to get some extended profile information, you can do so again with single identity management and authentication flow with Azure AD. You don't have to again say, oh, this is a different endpoint, doesn't live in Exchange, or doesn't live in SharePoint, or doesn't live in AD. Do I need to go through another flow? No, it's only you need to just get a token once authenticated. Then we have the mail, calendar, contacts. This has been the key thing used by many apps today, many developers. You can go get inbox, events, that is the calendar and contacts, and just mine all the content and do some different interfaces for users to be more proactive using mail, or managing their contacts, or even managing their calendar. And then the files. This is OneDrive. So this particular endpoint is for OneDrive for Business, where you can go and say, hey, get me the users' files from their OneDrive for Business. Or you can also go to a default document library in the SharePoint for a SharePoint site if you just want to put some documents for a site. Otherwise, you can use the just the files API to go access users' document. There are a lot of stuff here that you would feel it's probably only applicable for Office 365 and not for the consumer version, right? We have a similar consumer version as Mail, Calendar, Contacts, OneDrive. So the goal for us is to actually unify these. So the authentication is one authentication for both, and you get one API endpoint. And based on who the user and who the identity of what the identity of the user is, we'll go to the business endpoint or we'll go to the consumer endpoint. That's our goal, and we have been working very hard with that. There are some sessions by the OneDrive API team at Ignite, as well as at Build, on showing some of the vision of how they're going to achieve that. I think if you I would highly recommend watching that if you really want to understand how these both converge to give you one API endpoint. So one of the key things in Office 3 API is to really get access to these different workloads. And they are endpoints. They are something, https://something.something.something/API something, right? There are two ways to do it. One, you can hard code them in your app, or you can have somebody let you know what is the endpoint. And that's where the discovery service comes into picture. With the user's information, as soon as the user is signed in, you can query the discovery service and say, hey, what is the endpoint for accessing this user's inbox? What is the endpoint for accessing this user's files? Discovery service is going to go and get you the URL and the resource ID, with which you can now go and say to Azure AD, it's like, hey, I need to access this user's this resource, which may be calendar or contacts, and here's the resource ID for you to go and check. So then Azure AD will do some things which we'll see very soon what it does. But basically the idea is you query this discovery service, and that's going to tell you where to go and what to look for. So the discovery service is very important and very useful in your Office 365 API flow. We'll see how we do that in the demo. So here are some examples. Everything is OData. We try to make sure we follow OData spec. So it provides plenty of opportunities for us to have different features. And we are improving it by adding more features in different versions. The APIs are versioned, if I haven't mentioned before. So today we have v1.0. We will have certain endpoints in beta. And then we will have v1.2.0 or whatever that is whenever we feel that it's better to push the new version. So now let's dig deeper into authentication. So this is one of the key things. Now you have understood, kind of we have skimmed through what are the different features available in Office. But in order to get access to it, we first need to authenticate the user and authorize the application, right? It's similar to saying you open your app in iPhone or Android or Windows Phone. You're going to say, hey, this app needs access to your Facebook profile. Do you want to allow it or not? And then when you click it, it's going to take you to Facebook. It's going to let you log in, and then it's going to say this application wants to access your profile, blah, blah, blah. Oh, allow, don't allow, right? So that's the process. We need to build that process in order to say your application wants to access users' contacts, users' mail, users' files, whatever you request. So how do we do that? So with Windows 10, if you noticed in Keynote, we announced that you can now actually log in with your Office 365 account, which is work or school account, directly, and that integrates your whole AAD, which is Azure AD authentication, in this box, in the Windows 10 box. So this is called, I think, Cloud Domain Access something. I can show you there. So it's really cool. Then what happens now? Well, as a developer, you can use some of those APIs to actually get authentication via Azure AD in a real simple 3 lines or 4 lines of code, right? So what do we have? As a developer, you get few APIs. We start with Web Account Provider API. Now, these are all extensible. Even Facebook could come and build their own Facebook account provider. But by default, we have Azure AD Account Provider. So this is the kind of the key thing to say I'm going to be authenticating to Azure AD, right? So we have an API method called Find Account Provider Async. That'll take a parameter, which is give me the ID of the web account provider. In this case, login.windows.net is the ID. We pass that, and you'll get an Azure AD provider. Once you have that, now we need to kind of say, I need to get token for such and such resource from Azure AD. Remember, there's workloads, and every workload has a resource ID. So calendar has a resource ID called calendar. We will see that. And you need to tell Azure AD that I need to get access to that resource. So the request token async is kind of like, initially there is the first one of the application. There's no tokens. You haven't done this at all. So you have to get the token. The user has to sign in. So the request actually initiates the sign-in, initiates the dialog, and then gets the token back. Get token silently async is kind of like, hey, I've already signed in. I have a token in my Windows 10 has registered it. I'm just going to go get, so I don't want to let the user sign in. Now, in my build that I'm running, this is yet not fully baked. So you would see that the cache doesn't work. So I will always get prompted for username and password, but that's just a time gap solution. In the future builds, they are actually the product team is actually fixing it, so the APIs actually mean what they say. So they're all latest beta bits. So once you are authenticated, you need to get the response, right? You need to grab the token. Those are available using the web token request result and the web account property. And we will see that in the demo once. This getting familiar with it and then going back to the demo would help us to understand what we do. How many of you have used ADAL? Yep. So that's the kind of the common library across Microsoft platform to go and talk to, well, not Microsoft, all of the platforms to go and talk to Azure AD, right? So it's called Active Directory Authentication Library. It's open source. It's available to all platforms. It does the same thing that Web Account Provider does, right? It abstracts a lot of authentication communications going on there and helps you to go get tokens and authenticate the user. So why do we use Web Account Manager then? And what is the deal here? Well, if your app, whatever you're building, only targets Windows 10, then you can go ahead and use Web Account Manager. You will get full support across all Windows devices, whether it's tablet or phone or Xbox, right? I don't know how you would authenticate in HoloLens, but that's a really good story to go look at. And then if you want to use ADAL, then I think the real question is, hey, am I building apps that go beyond Windows platform? For example, Xamarin apps, right? So tomorrow I'm giving a talk on building Xamarin apps for Office 365, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. So that in that talk, you can see me using ADAL.NET, and I'm not using Web Account Manager. The reason is I get a really good flexibility to share my code across iOS, Android, and Windows project, and have one layer that authenticates the user and gets tokens. In that case, I will be using ADAL.NET. And similarly, if you're using iOS or Android, native like Objective-C or Java, you get ADAL packages for those. So you can go use ADAL. And today, ADAL does not use the Web Account Manager, so it uses the 8.1 interfaces. But the future versions will start using the new Windows 10 APIs to authenticate the user. So if you don't use Web Account Manager, you still use ADAL, you will still fall into using the Web Account Manager and take the benefits of Windows 10. And all the existing apps today that use ADAL in the Store app or a phone app will work in Windows 10. So there's no change in that. They will just, if you download an app and if you install it, they will still use ADAL. They will still all work as they have been working in 8.1. So that's a lot of content. So I have one Raspberry Pi. I don't know what question to ask. Anybody have a question? You don't want Raspberry Pi? There you go. Yep. So the question was, what is the recommendation for building an app that is responsive versus building an app for SharePoint? Yeah. I think here the scenarios are you're not actually extending the SharePoint UX, right? You're actually trying to get data from SharePoint or from any other workload and trying to build something that is relevant to whatever app you're building. For example, you could have a My Project app that basically has a group behind the scenes, which is in SharePoint, or a team site behind the scenes, which is still in SharePoint. But for when you're actually having a Windows 10 app, you could actually have a different views to bring the data from SharePoint. And the key thing to understand whether I need to build it responsive or not is whether you're targeting just tablet and desktop versus different devices, right? Good example is you have a project and you have some knowledge management videos, right? It's pretty common. If you open that app in Xbox, nobody is going to read content in Xbox. So you can actually have such a way that it only shows videos, right? So you can have some training videos in Xbox and keep it there. When you open the app, it only shows videos. If you fall back to a desktop, you get much more content. You can interact with, hey, I can complete this project, or I can mark this project, or I can go add some files to it and do whatever I want. If it's phone, I can even make such a way that it's much more relevant to the task that I can do on a phone, right? So that's kind of what responsive is. It's quite easy to get confused that responsive is only for UX, like from the user interface, but it also goes down to what your application wants to do, right? And depending on where your application is running. And again, you can even say that, hey, can I find whether I have access to mouse and keyboard using the APIs, and enable a few things based on that. So especially in video editing, for example, if you have a mouse and keyboard, you can say, yeah, I'm going to enable video editing, right? So that's kind of the things that you would see, some examples of how you can do adaptive interfaces or UX in Windows 10 apps. Does that help? There you go. You get a Raspberry Pi. I can give you later. Yeah. So what does it take to build such app? Well, we first need a Windows app, right? And then we need to tell Azure AD that I'm going to build an app. So that's the next step. Once you have done that, you can tell Azure AD what are the resources that you need access for this app. So it could be calendar, contacts, mail, etc. And once you have done that and set everything in Azure AD, you come back to your application and you write code to get the token for the target API service, whether it's contact or calendar. And one of the things you see here is that I'm saying you have to request access before. So if you don't have access, the API is going to say you don't have access. You're unauthorized to access this resource. So that's why before you write code, you need to make sure you have those set. And finally, you can then use the SDKs or the REST API. If you're using SDK, all we need is the access token to get passed on the SDK. If you're using REST, common programming pattern, you just add the access token to the authorization bearer, and that will validate all of the requests that are going to Azure AD. There's one thing that we need to do with Azure AD, is how many of you built Azure AD apps before? No? This is the first time? Okay. One of the ways that Azure AD validates that whether the request is actually coming from your app versus somebody else's app is having a redirect URI that will kind of matches with your app. So with Windows 8.1, we always recommend to have the callback URI. That is the URI that actually when you publish to the store or when you're debugging, you can actually get the URI. That URI will be used in the store as a URL to your app. That URI, you need to put it in Azure AD. So Azure AD can say when some request comes in, it sends the callback URI and it will validate whether it's the same app. If it's not the same app, then something is going on, right? So it doesn't allow your request to successfully fall through. So in Windows 10, it's a little bit different. The only difference here is the blue. The red, you can see the gray and a red, which is SID and MS app : that's kind of the callback URI. In Windows 10, it makes it much even more kind of strict rule to say, hey, it needs to be MS Apex Web, Microsoft AD Broker plugin, and then the SID. So currently we have to construct this, but there'll be more APIs to actually provide you access to these, so it will give you exactly that URI, so you can actually copy and paste in the Azure AD. And then once we have that, we can write code. The code will send the callback URI automatically to the cloud, the Azure AD, and Azure AD will say, am I getting the right call? If it's the right call, it will execute. If not, it will say, hey, the redirect URIs don't match. It seems like there is some problem here. So to register an app in Visual Studio, we have Office 365 API tools for Visual Studio that will help you to register your Windows 10 app with Azure AD, and you can configure the permissions that you want right away in the wizard. If not, you can also go directly to Azure AD, and you can configure everything in the Azure UX, copy the client ID, come back to your code, paste the client ID, and do the programming, right? Otherwise, we can use the tools, and that makes a little bit your life a little bit easier than going and doing it manually in the site. So for SDKs, we have .NET SDKs that work across all of the .NET flavors of applications, whether it's Windows Desktop 8.1 or Windows 10. Windows 10 is still, there's more work ahead, but we are actually having one .NET package for all. And even in Xamarin Apps. So if you come tomorrow for my talk, you'll actually see the same SDKs that I'm using here used in Xamarin Apps. And similarly, if you're building native apps in Objective-C and Java, we have SDKs for that too. So it's not just .NET. So let's start with authenticating to Azure AD. So let's see what it takes to authenticate. Now we're actually going to a real app that goes and interacts with Azure AD. So we created this demo app in our first demo, right? We started building a simple app. So let me show you how to actually register this app in Azure AD, right? So let me change. Okay, let's keep that. So in the add, so if you go to the Visual Studio, right-click and add, we get the new connected service experience, which I call it as service reference for the cloud service world, right? We are living in a cloud world, like we have different services like Salesforce, Azure, and Amazon or whatever, right? So they all require a similar OAuth flow, and there's kind of much more happening there than a WCF service hosted somewhere that you use a service reference dialog to connect to. So Visual Studio has come up with this really cool tool that you can also extend and integrate your own service into this, so you can build stuff, so you can help developers integrate your service. And you can see that we also have Salesforce. We partner with Salesforce, and you can now directly integrate with Salesforce from your app in Visual Studio if you want to. You can download that here. In Microsoft, we have Office 365 APIs. So as soon as you click Configure, it's going to say, hey, if the first thing is register your app. And I am going to register my app by signing into my home or work or school account. In this case, my work account is an Office 365 account. So as soon as I do this, what happens is for that tenant, this buildignite.onmicrosoft.com, there's an Azure AD associated with it, right? That's how we are able to have users for your Office 365 subscription. Now it gives me all the resources available, and I can go and say, hey, for calendar, I need to allow this app to read your calendars, as in read the user's calendar. I want to read users' contacts. And my files, I want to go read users' files, right? Similarly, for mail, you got read your mail. And you see that there's also just send mail as you. If you just, all you want is to just your app to send mail. So similarly for sites, if you are actually doing SharePoint development or just accessing SharePoint sites, then you can use these permissions to do so. So as soon as I click Add, it's going to go do the modifications behind the scenes in Azure AD. And then it's adding all of my SDKs for interacting with the mail, calendar, contacts, and does all the changes to app.xaml. So a lot of things going on, right? You can do all these things manually. There's nothing really fantastic here, except that we are all able to help you in one big wizard, right? And we open up the MSDN page for you to go and look at what you can do next. So all it did was in the app.xaml, you can see it added my client ID, which is the application in Azure AD, an identifier for the cloud. And then it added the service reference, right? Just like how you would have a normal WCF app, WCF service. And then in the NuGet package, if we actually see in the packages.config, it added a lot of OData stuff. It added my discovery service client. It added my Outlook services, which is mail, calendar, contacts. It also added my SharePoint because I chose to add files. And then a lot of other dependency packages, right? So if you don't want to do this, you can actually go and say in the Manage NuGet package, you can go and search for Microsoft.Office365.discovery, for example. You'll get it, and you can install it manually, right? There's nothing that you need to use the tool, but tools actually help you be more proactive. And if you look at in the back end, if you go to your Azure portal, if you have a developer subscription, you can actually go to your administrator Office administration panel and click Azure AD. It'll actually take you to the portal. If you don't have if you're using a trial, the only way that you can do is you need to go to the Active Directory here, click New, click Directory, Custom Create, Use Existing, and now you have to log into your trial account that will link your Azure subscription to the Office 365 subscription. Just because it's a trial account, we don't have the commerce to say, I'll give you everything. We are trying to work hard to fix this flow, but if you already have a developer subscription or a paid Office 365 tenant, you can go to your Office 365 admin and click Azure AD, and it'll actually provision an Azure AD tenant, Azure AD portal for you. So now I'm using a demo tenant. So I have my tenant here. I have my applications here. Now I can come here and search for this client ID. I'm going to get my app. So if you remember, we had calendar, contacts. There you go. We have read users contacts, read users calendar, read users email, and then we have read users file. So see that there's a little bit different in the UX, right? You don't know what is files, what is calendar. So the wizard also helps you to kind of focus on what you want to do versus giving you everything to select what you want from the whole bunch, right? So that's also a really good thing in the wizard. And then we have client ID, and you can see the redirect URL here is MS App. All we need to do now is we have this. So if we do MS Apex Web, I think Microsoft.aad broker plugin / you just copy this. And you can actually keep that or delete it. So that's kind of what you have to do today. In the more frequent releases, we will actually update the tools to do exactly the same thing. Instead of going manually to the portal and writing the redirect URI for the Windows 10 app, the tool will do that for you. So that's what you get with the Visual Studio tools. Now let's go and look at the actual app. So here's my app. Let's see what it does, right? So I'm going to run this app now. And I'm running in Windows 10 tablet mode or desktop mode. So immediately it's asking for authenticating to Azure AD, right? So I can authenticate to Azure AD. And this is asking about, hey, there's something, you're adding a cloud account to Windows 10. I want to register this for you in this machine so I can cache everything. The message, everything is being worked out, so there's kind of a lot of work going on. It's still early bits that I have here. So that's going to be repeated every time you see me doing, because there's no cache currently working for Windows 10. And we got an error. That's probably due to something that I did in my code. Actually, let's rebuild clean. And then we'll also uninstall the app. So now it's going to ask again. You can see it's still beta code has on the top, some of the taskbar items have just come up here. There you go. Now it's going to work. And now it's going to talk to Azure AD service, bring back all the users that are not dummy content like we saw in our first demo, are actually real users. So they're all responsive. I have my menu working. So you can see here now I switched to a button. So this was a button, so you can see that layer out. You can write XAML code to do all those transparency and stuff like that. So this is actually going to Azure AD, authenticating to it, and getting the users from the Azure AD. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you this in Windows Phone. The web account provider is still not working in Windows Phone. So the API, the builds that are coming out, maybe in a month or so, you'll actually have that working. Right now, you won't be able to see this in Windows Phone 10, Windows 10 Phone. So what do we do here? How does this authenticate, and how does this get information using the APIs? So the same deal, right? I have my main page. Now, I have my grid, I have my top grid menu, I have my split view, same as what we saw in the static, except that now I can use data binding and data templates in XAML to actually build my UX, because I now have real code that gets bound to the UX that I have. So you can see in the pane, I actually have a list view with data binding enabled, so I can actually build the whole navigation, so all the menu items in code. And then I have my data template of the menu item here, right? This was like I put everything one by one. Now it's actually in a very good reusable pattern that I can just put and bind to my code. And for the content, if I go to my people page, you can actually see that I'm doing the same. Instead of having the static content, the stack panel, like 20 stack panels that I had before, it's now compressed into one data template. Now I can actually write the code to get the collection of users and bind to this grid view that will then use my properties of every object, the person object or whatever I'm using, to say, hey, this avatar property is the image, so bind it to the ellipse image brush. And the text blocks, the name of the person is name property, right? It's pretty simple, whatever we have been using in WPF that comes down to Windows 8.1, now it actually comes down to even Windows 10. So nothing different here, the exact same pattern that we have been using before. So if you actually see the main page.xaml in the code, we have the same thing, right? When the size changes, change my grid. When the main page gets loaded, navigate the frame to people page. And what I'm doing is I'm also now building the navigation of the content pane, the items that go inside the content pane in code rather than XAML. So if you actually look at this, you can see that I'm creating a name link list of contacts, events, and for the symbol, I'm actually using people, globe, message, mail. I could have put this in my XAML. I really like coding and data binding, so I'm now putting in data bind. So tomorrow if I have to do some changes and add some stuff extra, I can just add it here and it will just show up in the UX. And I have a base model for every page that has the authentication in there. So the idea is every page I write, I will inherit this authentication model. So every time I open a page, I'm going to check whether the user is authenticated. If not authenticated, go grab the tokens and everything that I need to do. So you can see here the first step, as we saw on our slides, is getting the web account provider. So I'm getting my web account provider here, right? It's a method in my app. And all I'm doing here is web authentication core manager dot find account provider async, the same API we saw on that slide, and calls this, sends this parameter that tells this is Azure AD account provider that I need. Once it gets back, I get it back here. Now I have the AAD account provider. Now I can create the token request, which will now initiate the login. So it's creating web token request with AAD account provider with my client ID. Now again, client ID is here, right? It's in my app.xaml. There you go, app.xaml. And the request prompt type is, hey, do I need to show this every time, or do I need to use silent? I'm setting it to default, right? And then I'm adding some properties, which is authority is kind of where you want the user to land to authenticate. Facebook has different one, Twitter has different one, Azure AD has login.windows.net/common, right? And then the resource. So you can see here I'm getting the resource. So when I say I want access to people, that is Azure AD, I'll send the Azure AD resource here. And then I'm getting my function, get token silently async, calling the function and passing the token request. That's going to be an await, so asynchronous. It's going to come back, and I'm checking the response status. If it's the first time that you're using, then obviously the user interaction is required, so the user has to enter something. If that is the case, I'm using request token async. This is where, again, this early build, the token silently async doesn't work because Windows doesn't cache anything. So this code will always go into user interaction required for the demo that I have here. If everything is working in the next few builds, you can see that once you register and in Windows 10, it will say this method will pass, and you'll come back here. Response status is success, right? And then once it's success, you can actually get the response data, and then that response data dot web account, and it has a token too. So then you can return this object, and now I have the web account and the token that I need for that resource, and I can use it in my SDK to call any service I want or REST API. So what do I do? What do I do in this app? Let's run again. So I'm going to sign in. That's not my app. So we got the user. The goal of this app is 5-minute meeting, right? It shouldn't take long to book a meeting with someone. It should be really as simple as possible. So I have my user Ali B behind in the screen. I select the user. It's going to ask me what is the time duration you have. I'm going to say 30 minutes. I'm going to say tomorrow. Again, it's going to contact the service and book a meeting. This is, again, due to the bug that there is no cache. I have to enter this every time I go ask for the service. It will say, oh, you don't have token. I'm going to authenticate you, get the token. If I was having the cache fully working, I won't actually have that problem. It's actually an adventure to have all the latest builds for Windows 10 and see which ones work, which one doesn't work, or when will it work. Yeah. It'll come for both desktop and phone and Xbox. Yep. So there you go. I got a toast notification, 5-minute meeting created, and there you go. Behind in the browser, you can see I got a meeting request from Alex. I did the same demo for Bill, so there's Bill still there. 30-minute meeting for status report, and I can accept. So that's the app, right? So all it did was it allowed me to select users. It allowed me to select a simple UI. There's nothing going on here, but as soon as the last UI hits, it now talks to the service with my model and sends the data to calendar service. So let's quickly look at what it looks like for the calendar service. So in my select day page view, which is today, tomorrow, someday, that's when, as soon as you select some action, I started adding the event. So to add an event, what I'm doing here is I'm actually now, I have to use Outlook, right? So I am talking to Discovery Service first. The Discovery Service resource ID is apioffice.com/discovery. You have to at least have this constant somewhere, and it's documented in MSDN. once that you get access token for that, which is using the same method we saw here, right? Web account provider, get the token, create the token request, and then pass the resource ID here. That's exactly what you're passing in here. The rest of the code is same. And then you have discovery client to actually go initiate this. So you create the discovery client, and then you say the discovery client has just a function getter that will say, hey, all I need is a token from you, so I can use it when I do service calls. Just like inserting authorization bearer in a REST API call, you're just returning in this function getter the token. So then you have the discovery client has methods that actually has enables you to discover all the capabilities, the workloads that your app has access to, are just one. And the one is constants. You can get these in the MSDN documentation. For calendar, it's calendar. For contacts, it's contacts. For files, it's files. So once you do that, it's going to execute. We already have the token here. It's going to get the token back whenever it's going to pass an API request. And then once you have that, now in the service info result from discovery service, you'll actually have the endpoint URI and resource ID. So now you know where to actually go to talk to calendar service or to go talk to contact service, depending on what you have passed what you have asked discovery service to go get it. Make sense? So now what I'm doing is I'm getting the access token for Exchange. So now I know my Exchange calendar endpoint. The first was discovery, second was Exchange. That's why you saw 2 times the authentication dialog pop up. So once I get the access token for Exchange, now I'm building my calendar object, right? New calendar event. Here's the start. Here's the end. Here's the subject. Now again, this is all there in the APIs and my model. And then I add the attendees, who the attendee is based on the user I selected. And then I get a good object that represents my calendar event. And then I use REST API now instead of using Outlook SDK. So this example now uses REST API to go talk to Outlook. So the way that I construct this URL is I get the service endpoint URI again from discovery service, and I'm able to prefix that /me/events. If it's inbox, /me/messages. If it's contacts, it's /me/contacts. Since I'm using calendar, it's /me/events. What is the endpoint URI? Well, I just asked discovery service. I got it, and I'm using that to construct the string. And then I'm just serializing this normal REST programming. How many of you use REST in C# HTTP client? That's exactly what I'm doing here, right? I serialize the content. I create a request creator, come back here, create HTTP client. I have a method that actually uses normal REST. It constructs the header. You can see that it now puts the access token that I got for calendar as a bearer, and then it uses send async. If it's unauthorized for some reason, I'm now again using the same get access token I have method with the resource ID, whatever I pass in here, to go grab the access token, and then invoke the request creator to go and execute the call. So pretty much same REST API, right? There's nothing different here. The APIs are open. You can see the metadata. The metadata is outlook.office365.com. You can actually get it in the documentation. So if you go to dev.office.com, if you go to REST APIs reference on the top under documentation, you can go to calendar API, right? So create, and you can actually see the whole endpoint. And you can actually try it out. Like if you just want to get your metadata, it'll ask you to sign in. And then you can look at the metadata, click on it, and you have everything here. And the REST API reference will actually give you the exact URLs that you want to use in your app if you want to use the REST instead of the SDK. So that's what we do. It's pretty simple. Once you know the API, it's pretty much any programming that you have done with any API out in the cloud service. So one thing that we saw, I have 5 minutes left, so I'll quickly jump over to the PowerPoint. So one of the things we saw was we were getting token again and again, right? We used Discovery Service, we got the token. We used Calendar, we got the token. And if that code used Files API, we had to get another token, right? So that's actually not very good. So what we saw, just summarizing it, we saw the Windows app, creating a Windows app, registering the app in Azure, configure app permissions, get the token, build your code. Now, it will be tremendously hard to keep track of all the code that goes and access all the resources, different access tokens, different things that happen for different resources, whether you suddenly use CRM, for example, or if you want to suddenly use some of the Power BI, for example. So that's when we have this unified API. So the real thing that the big benefit that you get with unified API is that its name says it's unified. You have only one access token, and as long as you say these are the resources that I need access to, you get only one access token to do so. And that access token will grant access to all the resources. So really good example. Here's the user, right? The user may want to have lots of properties. The user may have a manager, direct reports, and could be member of different groups. Could also now have inbox messages. It could have a lot of events. It could also have a lot of documents that are shared with different people or specific people. You also have user being part of different groups. And again, the user may have collaborating with the groups with specific documents and events. And again, a lot of things that you can do today in Office, right? Working with, there's task, there is trending notes, a lot more. You can see how this has become complex. Even I'm, stuttering to explain this. Think about building an app that goes and gets all this information and projects that information to the user. That's got to be easy, right? We don't want to make this complex. So that's where graph.microsoft.com, the unified API, comes into picture. So there's a separate session by Ina Arenas, who's the PM for the Graph API, the unified API. And she has a good session explaining how to build apps that uses a unified API with web applications. So I highly recommend watching it if you're really interested and curious to know how to build apps. So here you can see the queries become really simple. They're still REST OData. They still follow single identity management and authentication flow. But the REST API is really simple. You just say it's in the beta endpoint today. So you just say beta me/me/manager. You'll get it. If you want to get the the working with, which is kind of like what are the different things that user is activity of the user. The last line which says /beta/me/working with. It's really simple. It traverses through the user context across all the different endpoints you have in Office. So I'll quickly show you. It's really simple. We have 2 minutes. So I have the actual code that uses the unified Graph API instead of the REST API. So what happens, I don't need the Discovery Service anymore. I can actually comment this out. Because Graph unifies everything. It is smart enough to go find it for you when you say /me/events. You need not use Discovery Service to understand where do I go. So now I come down here. Instead of constructing this URL, I'm going to construct graph.microsoft.com/beta/me/events. And then instead of, where is it? So of these, I uncomment these 2 lines, and comment out what I had before, and I use this. Now I'm getting the token for graph.microsoft.com instead of calendar or discovery service. And then I'm using the same method, send request async, the same REST API. But the only thing that has changed is graph.microsoft.com instead of using a discovery service to find out where the Outlook endpoint is. Now I'm going to rebuild this. Come on, quick. There you go. Now I'm going to execute. It should work. There's nothing in my inbox. I click next. Hopefully when it gets fixed, it's actually a better story, so it doesn't always ask for my username and password. Authenticate to Azure AD. I can put a progress bar, all those things which I have in my list of things to do. And actually integrating this with Xamarin App. So tomorrow you won't see the Windows 10 in Xamarin Apps, but when we publish to GitHub, it'll actually be a iOS, Android, and Windows 10 all using the same code. It's really good. It's like a really powerful app when it does. So I think the internet is really slow. Yeah. Let's see whether we get one last time. So I think let's skip this. But basically, that's the change you need to do. You need to stop using Discovery Service and fall to graph.microsoft.com/beta/me/even/me/messages. And Ina actually has done a really good job taking you through the steps of building a web app. You take the same .NET SDK. There's an SDK for Unified API. You can use that SDK too. Take it and use it in Windows 10 or Xamarin, and they all work as exactly the same. Your same code works across all the .NET projects. Thank you for coming here today. Thank you. So we have developer program announced at Build, 3-year subscription, free tools. If you haven't signed up yet, go to dev.office.com, sign up, and if you go to the lab, to the upstairs booth, you can do some labs and try out some of the add-ins for Office and SharePoint too. Thank you all.